Welcome to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Hey guys, before we jump back into the podcast, I want to say thank you for listening. But I noticed that you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet. Go to Deal to Heal Podcasting Network on YouTube or just scan the QR code in the corner where you'll be able to find multiple podcasts that we have with over 300 episodes that's uploaded right now for your enjoyment. So do that really quickly. Now, get back to the podcast. All right, welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I am your host, Earnest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. Therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. And if you haven't already, make sure you guys check us out on our YouTube channel and subscribe to our podcast on all of your podcast listening platforms. But definitely check us out on our YouTube channel, which is the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network, where you will find our sister podcast, which is the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, which is where I have discussions with other girl dads like myself about the daddy-daughter relationship in order to combat the narrative of the absent father and the fatherless daughter. So that podcast is there on our YouTube channel, as well as the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, which you are listening to or currently watching right now. So make sure you guys go. Again, check us out on our YouTube channel where you will find our sister podcast and the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast at Deal to Heal Podcasting Network on YouTube. Make sure you guys check us out there. But today, just like any other day, we are blessed with the guest, Miss Christine Dillard. How are you doing?
Hi, Ernest. I'm good. How are you?
I am well. First of all, let me say thank you for being here, because you could have been doing anything else with anyone else, but you're here with me and my listeners, and I definitely appreciate it. I'm sure that they will too. So Christine, let's jump right into this thing. Do me a favor, introduce yourself to my audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay. I'm Christine Dillard. I am the author of The Truth She Showed Me, and I'm an advocate for domestic violence survivors. I also, by day, work in a Fortune 500 organization with AI. So it's a busy life, mom of two, and I'm super excited to be here to talk a little bit about coercive control with you.
Yeah, we definitely go get into that because it was even hard for me to pronounce it, and I know some people may have haven't even heard the phrase before or the word before, but I think a little bit of a hint that you just given us around domestic violence and everything that has to be in that space. So let's start there. First of all, before we go there, let's talk about Christine, the earlier version of Christine, should I say, before the work that you do now, and probably even before the marriage, as we will get into later. Who was Christine? Who was Christine growing up? Who are you, and kind of what was your passions just growing up that kind of even led you to when you got to the space of where to get into the work that you do now. Of course, that was a journey within itself that we will get into. But prior to that, just like, who was Christine at her earliest, living her life like it was golden?
There was still some similarities. She was young and loved to help people. She started her career in doing staffing and helping people find jobs, and that evolved into some nonprofit work in her college years. And like late in my college years is about the time I got married and started having kids. But full of life, lots of friends, just happy, goal-oriented, wanting to do big things, change the world. And then, I moved into college and moved into college. I was a non-traditional student, so I did not move into college. I went to college, um, and worked through getting my bachelor's and then my master's. And about that time is exactly about the time I got married, and shortly thereafter, my first child was born. So um, the one consistent thing though is the passion for helping people.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely a passion of mine. Of course, that's why we even here on
Yeah,
this podcast because I just have a heart for people, as I like to say, and like to help. And so that was even the reason why I started this podcast. And when I was asked, excuse me, when I was asked, I don't know what that is. When I was asked, what I wanted the podcast to be about. I had different topics that I had spoke on, recently. Where it could have been went either way, but I was like, no, I don't want to hit just one topic. I want to hit as many topics as I can because there are people that are hurting in so many different ways, and those ways, some of those ways, I have no experience in. And so I wanted to have other people on like yourself to share your story, your expertise, so that I can reach as many people as possible. And so in this space, I definitely don't have any personal experience when we talk about coercion and we talk about domestic violence. I don't have any experience in those spaces personally, because definitely, when it comes to domestic violence, I always was against that ever since my whole existence, should I say. And there were experiences that I've had with friends who didn't have the same values that I had.
yes,
And one I'll tell you one it's one situation. When I was a teenager, I had a car and I drove my friend to his girlfriend's job, and he was supposed to get some money from her. And when she said she didn't have it, or she couldn't give it to him, then he didn't like that answer. And so the car that I had was a two-door, and she was in the back seat. And so he started his whole thing, and I'm like, dude, you already know I'm not down for that. And we were way away from home. You know what I mean? And I was like, if you put your hands on her again, you walking home. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
so that was kind of the
Thank you for
put a
that.
pause on that. And I was like, all right. And I told her, come out, get out on my side, because he wouldn't let her out on this side. I was like, get out on my side. And I let her out, and she went back to work. But, that was like one of the only times that it was like right in front of me. But I always had my own stance, like, no, I don't believe in that. And so if you're going to be my friend, I can't say what you do when you're not around me. But especially in my car or in my vicinity, I'm not gonna accept that. And so that was kind of has been my stance and my experience, since I was a kid, and I'm 50 now, but that was always my stance. So I don't have any personal experience, in that area. And so again, that's why I bring on other guests who have unfortunately experienced some things, but they made it to the other side of it, and so they can help us, which brings us here. So let's talk a little bit about your experience. I know that now with the work that you do, it all had to start somewhere. So kind of give us your story, like when it all started, and first of all, I want to ask you, and I'm probably going to say it wrong again. Please explain what coercion means, for those of us who may not be necessarily familiar with the phrase or the word, but I'm sure we are. Once we give the definition, they'll be able to associate the definition, maybe just with different words.
Yeah, absolutely. So coercive control is the abuse that we can't always see. Most of the time, we cannot see. So it's the type of abuse that doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't get black eyes or broken bones. It oftentimes shows up a lot of times behind closed doors. So it's not always. It's very often not a public scene where people would actually see it. It shows up in the form of like controlling one person controlling the bulk of the finances and not allowing the other person access to those. So you see that a lot of times in single income households. You can see it show up in like the form of control. So monitoring where you're going, what you're doing, who you're talking to, um, monitoring phone use. It shows up in the form of isolation where they the abuser starts to create a narrative with your friends and family that ends up putting you in a position where you have to pull back from them. And so they start to erode your support system, because if you're in isolation, it's a lot easier to control you and your behavior. And then over time, it evolves into something where you start to truly lose your identity. You don't know who you are anymore, because every decision you make is a decision based on how that person is going to react to whatever decision you made. So you start to make the decision that you know that you hope will create the best outcome and keep them from losing their temper or um, yelling and screaming at you, throwing things. They might not throw them at you, but they'll throw them around you, because the whole premise is to instill fear, to get you to do the things that they want you to do and behave the way they want you to behave.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, we might not have been necessarily heard the term before, but I definitely have understood those uh,
Yeah,
levels of control. It's especially when you mentioned about the control of the finances, and I know that in bad relationships and even bad marriages, is sometimes that's that level of control. It's like, oh no, and I and I would always even mention this sometime when I'm having conversations about relationships. When I talk to some ladies that be like, oh, I want a rich man and I don't have to work or whatever, and I said you got to be careful with that, because a lot of times there's a reason why they don't want you to work, and they may entice you with the gifts and all of that and saying, oh, you don't have to work, I got all the money. Yeah, but when you get into that relationship, they literally have all the money. You know what I
yes,
mean? And
yeah,
so then they use that as a way of controlling you, especially if you are attracted to the gifts and those things that they may provide in the beginning. So it's like, okay, well, I don't want to lose the gifts or whatever comes with that, but then you lose control of, like you said, yourself and your identity, because this person controls the whole narrative. And so,
hmm,
yeah, so I wanted you to give that so that the audience kind of have a idea, and even myself have an idea of, what exactly, we're talking about when we're talking about this type of control. And so for you, what was kind of the way that you got into it? Because I know just from personal experience and even from understanding of it, it's not something that switches right away. You know what I
right.
mean? It's like you might start off, but like, oh, they're so nice and all of that, and then over time or however it plays out, you start to see the red flags and sometimes even ignore them at some point. But for you in your story, what was kind of the beginning of, or how did it all start with you, for you personally?
I will say that there were definitely probably some red. There were not probably. There definitely were some
Yeah.
red flags early on. But everybody goes into a relationship with this like, Disney type. I want this happily ever after. Like, I'm looking for the one, Prince Charming, whatever. You have this vision of the life you're after, right, and the love you're after. And um, I lacked discernment. I would say, self love at that point in my life. I think that to some degree I attracted this person into my like life. Um, there were like little things early in dating where, he was late for dates, but there was no apology, there was no accountability, and I still went. And that's so there's a level also of accountability for me, because if I would have loved myself differently, I wouldn't have put up with some of the things that happened, right? Like showing up late for a date doesn't necessarily mean it's abuse, right? Like that's not the abuse. The abuse is the repeated pattern of that, and the repeated pattern of me accommodating that behavior and him assuming that I would. And that, although it seems minor, is the start. That, I mean, literally our first date, 3 hours late. Um, there like over time again it escalates a little bit, but start to tell yourself the story, because again you're trying to build this happily ever after. You don't want to fail in a relationship. So, and I had a huge fear of failure. So again, another kind of insecurity for myself that probably I needed to work through a little bit. And that fear of failure had me creating this narrative that covered up a lot of the behavior that he had throughout the entire marriage, from those early dates where he was late to um, later on when he would lash out, or he would I would be out with maybe some friends for dinner, and I would get repeated phone calls until I picked up, and then I'd urgently have to leave because he couldn't be home alone with his kids for a couple of hours. Um, Little things like that where they continue to create an experience that is no longer enjoyable. So, for example, the dinner out with the girlfriends. You do that enough times where you have to abruptly leave and explain why you're leaving because your girlfriends aren't going to let that go. So you have to like build the story to cover him up because you don't want people to know how bad it is, because if they know, they might say something and then that might create another set of consequences. So there's like this chain reaction. So you build this almost web of lies. It is not almost, it is a web of lies, and it's a web of false truth for every piece of your life and every part of your relationship, because you're constantly covering and in fear that things will get worse. In the going out with friends scenario, it gets, you get up and have to leave enough times that you just quit going. Like, it's just easier not to go, because then you don't have to deal with phone calls. You don't have to deal with the fallout when you get home. You don't have to deal with kids crying because dad was mad when you were gone, because it, as the other parent, whether it's mom or dad, you end up feeling that parental guilt for leaving and abandoning your kids in that scenario. So you start to adjust behaviors at every turn because you're constantly walking on eggshells, and you're always trying to be one step ahead of that next outburst. And when you do that long enough, there's no time to think about anything else. You're not thinking about you, your health, your wants, your desires, your hobbies, like all of that stuff starts to disappear until everything that you do is revolves around the other person, and your safety. Like, frankly, that's a huge component of this, right? The thing with coercive control is it escalates over time, and the less control that person has, the more control they try to get, and the scarier it gets along the way. Early in our marriage, when we would argue and fight, and he would have one of these outbursts where he was screaming at me. A lot of days I prayed that he would just hit me, because if he just gave me a black eye, nobody would question me leaving. But when you're in living this and you're trying to explain to people that all he does is yell and scream at you, you don't think people will believe you. You don't think people will think it was enough to cause the marriage to end. And some of that's like the like societal norms that we have out there, right? Some of it's religious upbringing. It's just some of it's pressure we put on ourselves to like have this happily ever after, when it's maybe not a fit. Like, sometimes we just need to acknowledge that. So yeah, for what it's worth, that's kind of what the experience was. And I was in this for 17 years. And kind of back to like me praying that he would just hit me. The reality is he did eventually hit me. The night he hit me, I hit my head on a door frame, and I had a concussion. So I had no memory of what happened from the time that my head hit the door frame until the next morning. You can't go to the doctor with that. You can't go to the police with that. Who's going to believe? It'll be he said, she said. Now I've just made my home situation worse because I reported it. So now, whenever we both are back in the house again, there's consequences to that for me and for the two children in my home, right? Mm-hmm. So you just get to this point where you don't report and you just behave until you wake up one day and decide that nothing's ever going to change unless you change.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's important to even to hear this story, right? Because, like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, it's little things that add up over time, and I think that sometimes, like you said in the beginning, because we want this happy relationship, or we want this fairy tale, relationship that just is not the relationship that we have. And so it's like, all right, well, what can I do to kind of make it that, and then sometimes there's nothing you can do to change it. And like you said, after a while of making excuses for this person and accepting, different behaviors and all of that, that's when you really start to lose yourself, especially when it gets to the friends, now it's a reason why, every time I have to leave when I'm with my friends, or even if I do give an excuse, after so many excuses, not only do I'm not going to want to show up. They're not going to want to invite me, And
Right.
so now again, we go back to that isolation where, okay, if I can keep everyone away from you, and then you really depend on me because I'm the only one that loves you anyway, and you start getting down to
Yes.
that, it makes it more and more for this person to begin to control you. And again, like we mentioned, there are red flags, and to my listeners, I want you guys to really, listen to the story and don't listen to it as just entertainment, should I say, but really pay
Yeah.
attention because there are red flags that shows up, and maybe your relationship may not even get to that point, but there are red flags that can show up, that could just put you in a position to really rethink the relationship that you're in.
Yeah.
Personally, I've never had the point where my relationship have ever gotten that far away from me. But I can remember even having been in a relationship where, some of the red flags I seen, it was kind of like, well, I look past that. Even the one with the phone call, I had one after my daughter was born where I got a phone call and it was like, you need to come home right now. And I'm like, why? Like you know exactly where I'm at and that whole thing and I get home and there's nothing even going on. Like I just
Yep.
want you to come home and I'm like, but for what? You know what I mean? But again, those things add up and then it could turn into something else, later on. But just really paying attention to those little red flags and even if you don't act on it, right away, definitely pay attention to it or even keep track because once you start
Yeah.
saying, okay, these flags is not adding up. Like my friend would always say, you see all the flags and you think it's a circus. Be like, no, it's not a circus. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's some bad things going on here. We need to pay attention to it. So thank you for sharing that. But as your relationship with Thorn, definitely eventually you guys got married or this started during your marriage, I'm sure that there was some, especially with the turmoil at home between you two, I'm sure there was some effects that it had on your children as well, or even the relationship with your children. Because, if the children are afraid, now you got to come home because the children are afraid. Now you're afraid to leave because the children are afraid. It kind of weighs on you on both sides. So how was kind of the experience, from the mother, from a mother's eye point or viewpoint, even watching the experiences that your children had in this environment? What was kind of the effects that it had on the children?
I think as a mom, I lied to myself about like if I could just redirect every time he lost his temper to me, like if he was upset with the kids, if I could just redirect that to me, it was saving them from the experience. And the reality is it wasn't. It maybe created a glass wall, but they were still there. They could still hear, they could still see, right? And the thing that I didn't realize was the redirection of that. Here I am teaching them that this is what love is and what it's supposed to be. So as they grow, you start to realize like, oh my gosh, is this what I want them to expect from a relationship? And I think that's when it starts to get real clear, that this is not what I want them to expect from a relationship. But the reality of any of these situations is you can't just leave. Like that is like my favorite question that people ask. I have a love hate with it, right? Is like, why didn't you just leave? Like, why didn't you just leave? And you can't. Like, what are you going to do? Leave your kids? No, no parent is ever going to leave their children like that in that situation. And people will argue, well, you're not, you can take them with, right? I can take them with, but now I've got a custody battle. And likely it's going to be 50-50 because, again, there's no bruises, there's no broken bones, there's no police reports, doctor's reports, there's none of this, right? We don't, as a society, globally, we don't recognize coercive control for what it is. And it creates a significant amount of psychological trauma. Like
Yeah.
they compare the effects of it to war vets because of the PTSD that follows, because you're exposed to it for this extended period of time, right? And the reality of these situations is because we don't have all of these records and we don't recognize coercive control as a form of like punishable abuse, I would share 50-50 custody. So is it safer for my children if I stay in this situation and make sure that I'm here? For me, it was. So for me, for 17 years, that's what I did. I stayed in the home. I stayed with my kids because it was safer for all of us.
Hmm.
I could have left, but then 50% of the time they go to they go to his house alone.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, I mean, I think there's this huge misperception about why people stay, and like this is why. If there are kids involved, this is, I mean, this is a huge part of it. That and feeling like you can't leave, you're trapped. You don't have the financial means because you
Yes.
don't have access to the finances. Um, they threaten your life, they threaten their life when you try to exit the relationship. They threaten the children. Like there are so many different dynamics we just don't consider that make leaving almost impossible.
Yeah, and that's what came to my mind. Even when you were just talking about it, I was like, well, going back to how we kind of started this conversation, especially with the financial control. That's the biggest monkey wrench that you have. Like if you don't have, if I was to run and leave today, but I don't have no money, what I mean, where am I gonna go? You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, and how long do I stay away before I have to go back because I don't have the means to be able to stand on my own, and I think that's important, to be able to explain that. Thank you for explaining it like that
Yeah.
because I don't think those of us on the outside looking in sometimes that's the first question, like, well, why did you stay that long? I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's not so easy of just leaving. Like, yes, physically I could just leave, you know what I
Right.
mean? And don't come back. But on the other side of that, where am I going? Where am I taking my kids? Eventually we're gonna have to go to court. All of those things come in play once you decide to leave, which
Yeah.
will kind of brings us to the other part of the conversation that we want to talk about, which is even building a plan to leave. Like, what does that look like? And how much time that may take for you to even build that to be able to get out of the situation physically, but not
Yeah.
just physically get away, but get away with enough provision and thought that you put into it where you don't have to backtrack, which could even make the situation worse. But before we get there, well, I'll say what. Let's go there first. Let's go there
Okay.
first, and then we'll get into the after happily, hopefully the happily ever after that you created for yourself on the
Mhm.
other side of it. But so even in the midst of it, knowing that okay, I can't just up and leave because I can't leave my kids, and then if I am going to up and leave, I definitely have to have some kind of provisions in place. So when someone, finds themselves in this position, where can they even start to say, okay, let me start thinking about an exit plan and kind of putting things in place. Also realizing that it's not an overnight process. Like it's going to take some time because even if you're making plans, you don't want to make your plans so obvious that they know you're making plans. You know what I
Right.
mean? So what
Yes.
is kind of even the beginning stages, things to consider that okay, if you feel the need for your safety and your children's safety to physically leave this situation or this environment, what would be some of the first steps to either consider that someone could put in place when building a exit plan?
I'll start by saying, like, if you're in physical danger right now, please, like, dial law enforcement, dial the DV center in your area, please. Um, if you are not in immediate physical danger,
Mm.
their planning is like your best option. And what I found was the day I decided I was going to start planning was 3.5 years before I actually left.
Mm.
It was a long, long time. What I will tell you though is every small decision you make, whether it's putting $5 cash away or it's buying gift cards that
Mm.
at the grocery store because he wouldn't notice an extra $10 gift card on a $100 bill. If it is something like that, every small decision you make like that creates this little bit of a spark of empowerment, and it starts to build and multiply. So start little. Like it can be as simple as I'm gonna leave. Like you don't have to have a timeline on there because you don't know it yet. You don't
Mm.
know how long it'll take. For me, again, it was 3.5 years, and I was kind of on a mission. I made some decisions that I now, in hindsight, I don't think would have mattered. But for me, in the state I live in, there's a certain age where the judges will take into account what a children's perspective is about where they want to live.
Mm.
And I had to wait until my youngest was at that age, which was roughly 12. And it's not a guarantee that they'll take that into account, but your odds are better the older they are, more mature they are. So I took a little bit of a gamble there. But my goal was to wait until she was 12. And in the interim, when I started planning, we were 50-50 for income in our household. So I won't say it was an advantage to have that. I at least had income, right? But my entire income went to all of our household bills. So I actually didn't have any income. So it was a slightly different play on financial control, but it was what it was. So I was on a mission to say, I'm going to replace his income. I'm going to cover the health insurance so that I don't ever have to rely on him for any kind of financial anything. And I never wanted the kids also to be indebted to him. So I wanted to make sure that when I left, that would be a non-issue. I didn't need child support. I didn't need health insurance. I didn't need any of those things because I could just be done. That's of course not exactly how it worked out, but I got to that point over that 3 years where I did replace his income, got that taken care of. I met with a lawyer. I started seeing a therapist because I knew that I wasn't really ready to recognize it for what it was or to call it what it was. And I definitely was not going to call myself a victim because I carried a lot of shame on that front because nobody in my life knew I was living through this the whole 17 years. It was after I filed for divorce that I started to talk about it a little bit. So over that 3 years, I just worked through that planning, little decisions here and there that just gave me that little bit of empowerment. I started spending a lot of time by myself, reflecting and kind of meditating on all of the things that I had experienced, trying to process some of it and the impact it had on me. Again, yeah, I met with a lawyer, did the therapy, or at least started that, had the kids' appointments lined up so that when I did file, the day I filed, they could go to therapy right afterwards, like right after they found out. Just putting some of those things in order gave me a sense of control in an area where I had not had control in a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I like that, and I think that's important for us to point that out because I like even some of the things that you said, like the gift cards, because the gift cards technically don't expire. You know what I mean? So the money's always on there. So it's like, oh yeah, you buy a couple extra ones around Christmas, but you stash them for yourself a little later. And I do want to say this too, you know, sometimes, and I'm never promoting, you know, necessarily. Let me say it this way: I'm never promoting necessarily leaving your marriages or breaking up your family and all of that. But what we're talking about today is when it's unhealthy. It's unhealthy. The relationship is unhealthy. The marriage is unhealthy. It's unsafe for the participants in it. It's unsafe for the children. Under these circumstances, then I have to say sometimes leaving is better than staying.
Yes.
I'm definitely raised up in a religious household, raised up with my mom and dad who was married my whole life, and then even they even played a part even with me when I got divorced. My first divorce was just like devastating to me because that wasn't my example. I come from a family of, two-parent households, and their parents was two-parent households, and there's like that whole dynamic on my side of the family. Unfortunately, on my wife's side of the family, then she was the only child who didn't have a relationship with her father, and her mom and dad, I don't think they were ever married. They just dated and conceived her. And so that being a different reality from myself, I never wanted to get divorced, let alone seeing
Right.
someone else go through a divorce. However, what we're talking here is when it's not a good relationship, but it's not a good space, healthy environment for anybody involved, right? And so that's what we're promoting. If you need to, even for a time period, to get away so that you can even begin to think, clearly and clear enough to see your marriage or see this relationship for what it is. That's what we're asking you to do. You know.
Yeah.
So even in your
Can I throw one thing in?
experience, yes.
Can I throw just one? So if you're sitting out there right now and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I don't even know where to start. The reality is you are a master planner and orchestrator because that's what you've been trained to be. Like, how to prevent problems, how to get in front of them, how to plan in advance. like take those skills that you've learned and start applying them to you and like that future for you. And again, like the one little decision today and it'll multiply tomorrow, even if it's small.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, just start with, yeah, because you've already been making amends and making adjustments just to keep the peace. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just start, like you said, focus on yourself with those same talents to create a space of peace for you and your children to go to whenever that time, that time comes. So, Christine, in your experience, after this whole part, and we get to the space where now that you've gone, you've left and begin to experience this new life, but you also go through a healing process, to be able to heal yourself from the things that you went through. What was that like, and what is what are some tips that you can give someone who does decide to leave, just an angle of where to go and to how to begin that healing process.
Um, I think we all have this like perception that, once you're out, oh, everything's gonna be great. It's gonna be all better. Everything's gonna be fine. And again, like I was not at a point where I was admitting the things that were happening, and I definitely wasn't going to talk out loud about them. And it took more than one type of therapy. I had a traditional therapist. I did Reiki energy healing. I later on, when some of the CPTSD like nightmares and panic attacks started showing up, as I started to like really heal, I started seeing a trauma therapist that was more specialized and had not only experience in dealing with it, but had also lived it. So find the therapy that works for you. Some people it's church, some people it's, actual therapy, some it's energy healing, some it's just like being in nature and like the elements, and working through it on your own. Find that therapy source that works for you. And if the first one doesn't work, try another one, because I had to do that a couple times. My first therapist wasn't the greatest one. So I tried again. I did the same thing with my daughter. We had to go through a couple to get to the right one. So don't give up after that first one, because it is worth it to like work through the whole healing process. It is not fun, I can tell you that. It's if you go deep, you're going to realize that like even beyond the relationship that got you into this situation, you've got something that got you to that relationship. And so you end up going way back to deal with things that you didn't even know were a problem or existed until you start working through this journey. And for me, it was therapeutic to write my story. It originally started like as journaling, because we throw around the term gaslighting a lot when we talk coercive control and abuse in general. And it will often happen that I would remember things one way, and then he would say something that would make it sound like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, it could have been worse. And so I found myself in the early days of the divorce saying those things to myself. Oh, was it really that bad? Some people did have it worse. Like they got hit like multiple times. You got hit once. Like it could be worse. Like, was it really worth leaving? Like all of these things are building up. And I found myself in a position where I was like, I don't ever want my kids to be in that situation where they're trying to decide, was it bad enough? And did I really live that? And so that's kind of where my journaling started, where I was like, okay, I'm going to write out some of these stories so that someday if I'm not here, they can get that validation that I gave myself through that journaling.
And so I'm guessing that's where the idea from the book started, or maybe like the foundation of when you started to write the book. So let's jump into that, because I shared with you that before we started recording that I had actually went to look up the book and started reading a little bit of it, and I was just like, okay, I'm dived in, So tell us a little bit about the book, and what do you want it to do for the reader. When first of all, what prompted you to turn your journal into an actual book, and then what is the thing that you want the readers to walk away with after even reading the book?
When I started that journaling, it was, like I said, for my kids. And I found, like, through the therapy and the energy healing and then the journaling, finally, a few months outside of the marriage, I started like dropping little nuggets of information to friends and family just to see how they'd react. Because when you come out of these situations, you don't trust anybody and you don't trust their reaction and you don't trust yourself. Like, and there's so many trust issues when you come out that you just don't know. And so when I started to do that, what I found was almost every person I talked to had a story. And it wasn't my story, but it was a similar story. And it was maybe the same kind of abuse, maybe different. But there was one common theme through all of those conversations. And it was that every single one of those people felt alone and they felt this immense amount of shame. So they didn't talk about it because they felt alone and they felt like they got themselves in this situation. And the more I thought about it, that was kind of the whole, like when I started the journaling, like I didn't want my kids to have that. And then I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't want anybody to have that. And I kind of got back into the roots of like, if I can help one person by giving my story to the world, that's all I want. Like just one person to look at this, to read it and be like, oh my gosh, I feel validated. I'm not crazy. I really did experience this type of abuse. And if anybody's seen It Ends With Us, the Colleen Hoover movie, it was also a book. It is the real life experience of 17 years of what that movie was or that book was. And it runs you through I start with our first date and I move through to the wedding and a lot of the different big moments. What you'll see as you work through the book is you'll see the pattern. Um, these type of abusers have a very specific pattern. Everything happens in a pattern to the point where even like now I know my ex is still on a 2-week cycle. So every 2 weeks I know to expect some sort of message that's going to derail my life for a second. Right. So you get better at managing it on the other side, but they're pattern people. So if you watch and kind of work through the book that way, you'll get that sense. And I take you through what it took to plan to leave and the setbacks that happened during that time. So it was like there was these glimpses of hope, and then there was this despair because for every 2 steps forward, it was 10 back. And there were some key, like super pivotal moments, people that I met along the way that restored my faith in humanity and in my spirituality and all of these different components that ultimately helped me heal. And then towards the end of the book, you're going to get a sense of what it's like to like move into a relationship afterwards. No matter how healed you are coming out of one of these things or how much time you invest in healing alone, some of these things you will never know are unhealed until you are in another situation with another partner. And then things start to come up. And so you get to see some of that turmoil that comes up later in life too. And again, like my one purpose was I wanted one person to read it and say, like, this is me. I feel like you wrote my story. I feel validated. I don't feel shame anymore. Any one of those things would be beautiful. All of those would be awesome.
I love it. I love it. And I definitely, like I said, I only read like the first, well, it was a couple pages. I was in it. I was in it, and I definitely can say it's well written, and I think that it would definitely do exactly what you wanted it to do. And I think that anybody who, especially those who need to read it, it's a difference between people that want to read it, but there are some people who need to read it, and I think that those people will definitely get what they need out of it. And so I want to thank you, in advance for them, for even writing it to give them the strength that they may need in order to leave a relationship that's just not healthy anymore. So I want to thank you, Christine, for coming on, for sharing your voice. I want you to have the last word. And so I want you to leave us with a word of advice, your social media handles, things of that nature, where we can find you and follow you as well. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that. To my listeners, I hope that you guys are definitely locked in. We're going to have a word from our sponsor, and then I'll come right back and go over a couple of announcements with you guys, and then we'll end this thing with Christine. So hold on really quickly. Hey guys, this podcast is sponsored by the Deal to Heal School for Living. That is our online community on the school platform. You guys can go there and check it out absolutely free for the first 7 days. And while you're there, take advantage of all the free resources that we have. And if you decide to stay, it's only $27 a month. And each month you have access to a new workshop. So go check that out at the Deal to Heal School for Living on the school platform. Just scan the QR code in the corner and you guys will be able to get there. All right. We'll see you soon. All right. All right. Again, make sure you guys scan the QR code in the corner and to check out the Deal to Heal School for Living. Also, I want you guys to check us out. One of the things that I'm doing now that we started doing is having a workshop because we're getting more into our workshops, and so we have a embracing your grief journey, a workshop in which we walk you through the grief, your grief process, and help you to get through that process when you're grieving. We have we have it bi-monthly, so you can scan the QR code that's on the flyer there, and it will take you there to our Eventbrite page where you will be able to see all of the things that we have there or all the dates that we have. And also, speaking of which, I'm gonna change this QR code real quick. So that QR code that's up there now in the upper left hand corner will also take you there as well, so you guys can check that out. Also, make sure you guys are following us on our website, which is the dealhealfulfill.org. Again, that's dealhealfulfill.org, which is our company website, should I say, which kind of have a lot of information on everything that we do, including the podcast, including some of the other things that we do. So make sure you guys following us there. Also, ebooks by ejames.com. That used to be where you could get the ebooks in which I have written, but guess what? That website is no longer up. However, I did make a way where you can get all of our ebooks absolutely free, actually. So when you scan the QR code and you go to the Deal to Heal School for Living, which is our community on the school platform, then you can go to our resources tab or to go to the classroom that says resources, free and paid, and that way you can download all three of the podcast, all three of the ebooks that I've written that are there. So when you go to Deal to Heal, I keep on saying Deal to Heal podcast. When you go to the Deal to Heal School for Living on the school platform, when you sign up, you get the first 7 days absolutely free. You're able to go through there and look at some of the resources and some of the workshops that we have available. And if you decide to stay, it's only $21 a month. And each month you will have access to a new workshop. So make sure you guys go and check that out, especially if you want to get access to all of the ebooks. But deal2healtees.com, which is our inspirational t-shirt line, that is still up. Again, that's deal, the number 2, healtees.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tee and be inspired all day. That is our tagline. Not only do we have our inspirational tees there, but we also have our podcast merch, which is our t-shirts with our podcast logos on it. There's one for the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, and there's also a t-shirt with the Deal to Heal with E. James logo on it. Make sure you guys go and check that out at deal, the number 2, healtees.com, deal2healtees.com to get your inspirational t-shirt. Also, last but not least, one of the things that I've been blessed to be a part of is a organization called the Forgiveness Mission. And what we do, we have free virtual workshops bi-monthly on the second Saturday of that month. And we talk about everything surrounding forgiveness, forgiving yourself, forgiving others, forgiving the world, even forgiveness and wellness, where we talk about how unforgiveness can affect you physically, even in your body. So whenever you're listening to this podcast, either the workshop just ended or there's one coming up, you can go to forgivenessmission.com to check out when the next virtual workshop is, and it's absolutely free, but the information is priceless. So again, go to forgivenessmission.com to see when our next one is, or you can go to Eventbrite and look up forgiveness workshops, and you will see the forgiveness mission workshops that are there, that I posted there. So make sure you guys go and check that out. So again, Christine, I want to say again, thank you so very much for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I want you to have the last word. Leave us with a word of advice. Have you feel motivation? I don't know. Whatever you feel on your heart. And also tell us where we can find you in order to work with you, and also to purchase the book. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the chance to come on the Deal to Heal podcast. You can find the book at on Amazon under The Truth She Showed Me. You can find any of the podcasts I've done on YouTube at The Truth She Showed Me. Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are all the same. So at The Truth She Showed Me. The piece of advice I'd love to leave this audience with is, if you're sitting in a situation right now where you're trying to decide, is it bad enough? The reality is, if you're asking yourself that question, it is bad enough. Your mind maybe is just now catching up with the signs that your body's been giving you, that your heart has been giving you. Know that it is bad enough if you have to ask that question. And also know that on the other side, that I believe you. And there is a whole community out there that I wish I would have recognized before I'd left, because I think I would have felt a lot less alone. There are a lot of Facebook communities, a lot of TikTok communities where you can join anonymously, where they're private, and you can kind of just immerse yourself in the stories. There's a lot of validation in being able to hear other people's stories, hear their experiences, and then there's a ton of hope that comes out of that, where you can see people kind of moving through that healing journey and moving on and out of these relationships. So just know that the survivor community is probably one of the strongest communities out there, and there is not a survivor out there who's not looking to help someone else who's in this situation get out. So know that you're not alone, and definitely please recognize that people out there believe you. I believe you. Thank you, Ernest.
No problem, no problem. We can't end it no better than that. To my listeners, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, where our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Until next time, you guys be blessed. Thanks for listening to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Remember to listen, like, subscribe, and share. This episode has been brought to you by Deal to Heal Teas. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. Remember, our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for listening.